former Naval Intelligence Officer, UN Chief Weapons Inspector, U.S. Marine, commentator on Russia Today, Consortium News, the Ron Paul Institute, and host of the Scott Ritter Show. If you haven't seen that, I implore you to go see it because he's been digging information out of Russia that I have not seen anywhere else. He's been defamed, he's been censored, but he keeps on seeking truth to power. W.S. Ritter, Scott Ritter, ladies and gentlemen. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you?
I play those kind of videos. Sometimes we need to emotionally digest the reverse Midas touch that our foreign policy has around the world. The last time I had you on, we talked about the renowned Assad curse in regards to the United Kingdom. And minutes after the interview, Shinzo Abe was assassinated right next door to me. And it seems that Italy has also followed this path. Congrats to Maloney. Hopefully no one else will be assassinated today. But we are seeing a sea change in Europe, and a lot of it has to be the reaction to the EU and NATO's play in Ukraine.
No, you're 100%. I mean, Europe is committing suicide in front of us. This notion that this is, Putin's war, Putin's tax, Putin's this, Putin's that. Putin hasn't done anything. Europe has found a way to commit suicide on its own. In fact, one can make the case that Russia has been bending over backwards to try and convince Europe not to commit suicide. I mean, if Russia was really vindictive, they would have shut the gas off a long time ago. But Russia has literally been saying, hey, guys, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. They keep throwing the lifeline, and Europe just keeps swatting it away and swimming deeper into the ocean with no game plan on how to get back. It's, I mean, as a guy who lived in Europe, has been around, I mean, I love Europe. It's a wonderful continent, great history, great people, great food, great beer, lovers of life. And to watch them literally commit suicide, because I don't think Europe's ever going to be the same after this winter. I think I fear revolutionary change. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, the kind of revolution that comes with 9 missed meals. When the saying goes, if society, however civilized it is, you get 9 missed meals and you have chaos and anarchy. People are going to be ripping down the government to eat. And Europe's going to go through that moment. Germany, civilized Germany, going to put troops in the streets next month. They're just going to, why? Why are you putting troops in the streets? Big advice to Schultz, read history, particularly Tsarist history, Tsarist Russia. Find out what happened to the Tsar when the Tsar put troops in the streets to stop hungry people, cold people, people desperate for work, people desperate to be treated with dignity. It didn't turn out well. I don't know why Germany suddenly thinks that they've got the formula for militaristic oppression of a people in need. Well, I know why, because the foreign minister of Germany said, we don't care about the people. We're going to do whatever we want, regardless of what the people think. And that's a recipe for the people to take matters into their own hands. And unfortunately, when you suppress truth, when you suppress freedom of speech, when you do all the suppression that Europe's been doing to its own population, you eliminate the center, and there you go, make speech free again. You eliminate the center and you encourage radicalism. And so when the governments are held to account, they're going to be held to account by radicals who aren't going to be seeking the approach of democracy. They're going to be seeking the approach of revolution. And Europe only did it to itself. I think this was the last summer one could have backpacked around Europe in relative peace and quiet. I think from now on, Europe is going to be fundamentally changed, not for the better.
Yep, and it's a combination of things. There's a lot of it was the overspending on coronavirus. We can say this because I'm already deplatformed on everything, so don't worry about words. Like, a lot of it was hyper spending on the coronavirus, but that definitely got compounded, especially in Europe, by putting sanctions specifically on natural gas and oil, which is also, and fertilizer, things like this. They're not going to have a price problem. They're going to have a shortage problem. It doesn't matter what you pay, it won't be available, and it's going to be worse even in the global south. I think realpolitik is dead. This idea that states act in the national interest is naive. States act for select commercial interests, and a lot of Europe really just does whatever the U.S. says.
No, I mean you just hit it on the head. Europe's political and economic elite are an extension of American hegemony. Europe, there is no independent Europe policy on anything. The European Union, the European Commission, NATO, every aspect of Europe is dictated to Europe by the United States. These elites uh, cannot exist without the United States. Therefore, they do America's bidding. And America's bidding also includes, and I'll just remind us, any European viewers that are out there. Um, I mean, Jeremy, do you remember that Barack Obama, Angela Merkel's best friend, bosom buddies? He ordered the U.S. intelligence community to intercept her phone calls to spy on your leader. And he got the assist from other European countries. Meanwhile, the Germans, who expressed outrage that, my God, he would ever, the German intelligence service was helping him listen in on French politicians and on others. We have turned Europe against themselves. We are literally the worst friends in the world. I say that as an American who loves my country. And would like to believe that we're better than we are. But you talked, you said the anti-Midas curse.
Reverse Midas touch, yes.
It's actually the Midas touch, because if you remember, the Midas touch was a curse.
True.
If you touch turned to gold, but that meant that it died. So if you touched a human, they died. See, America's out for America. We want to turn everything to gold for us. So we're going to go around and we are literally going to touch everything to make money. Ask the Europeans. Who's your savior? America? The LNG we're selling you? Do you realize the profit we're making off of your expense? We got you to buy into a policy that cuts you off from the cheap gas that enabled you to have this wonderful European decade with where you could sit back and have socialized medicine, socialized vacations, free education, great infrastructure. Wow, it was wonderful. How did you afford that? Cheap Russian gas. Cheap Russian gas was the key. If you take the price differential between Russian gas and the market price, you'll see that over the decades, cheap Russian gas enabled you to save trillions of dollars, trillions of euros, worth of income that you could invest elsewhere. Without Russian gas, you would have paid market price and you wouldn't be having this great economic buffer, but you've blown it. You let America come in and tell you, no to cheap Russia. The Russians never once used energy as a weapon against Europe. Never once. It was just a poison in their mind by the United States. They said, oh, no. You can't trust the Russians. The Russians are out to get you. Well, if the Russians were out to get you, they would have turned the gas off on day one. Russia's still trying to bring common sense to Europe. Russia doesn't want, the last thing Russia needs is a destabilized Europe. That's the absolute last thing Russia needs. That's the absolute last thing Russia wants. But Russia isn't going to allow Europe to prosper at its expense, meaning that if Europe decides, and let's remember the sanctions that were imposed against Russia, we can sit there and say, well, they were energy sanctions. Well, they weren't. They were sanctions designed to destroy Russia, to hurt the Russian people, to bring pain and suffering to the Russian people. That's a reality. These weren't sanctions designed to impact only the elite. These were sanctions designed to destroy a nation.
Yeah, they kicked them off of Swift. What's that got to do with energy? I mean, they were trying to destroy them. They felt they could. And I think this really impacted the outcome of the war. They assumed that Russia would be bleeding from sanctions and would have to charge into the entrenched defenses of Ukraine. Instead, not only did the sanctions not work, they hurt Europe. So Europe was bleeding, and Russia had their timeline, said, we can wait. We can wait till winter. We can sit back and hit you with artillery all day, every day. We don't have to hit your trenches. We don't have to hit your bunkers. You got to come to us, forcing them on the offense, which they did in Kharkiv, but they should have got anchor punched because, oh, yes, you took a lot of empty dirt and you lost a lot of soldiers. And it's very interesting to see this. You see the partial mobilization. You didn't see a mirror mobilization in Ukraine because they can't. They're out of guys.
Well, Ukraine's on their 6th or 7th mobilization.
Exactly. They don't have any depth left.
They're now talking about they're going to reach into the Sorbonne in Oxford to pull all the elite out of schools so they can go die in the trenches. So Ukraine is a fundamentally destroyed nation, and it's very tragic for the Ukrainian people that they allowed this to happen. It's their fault. They elected Zelensky, and then they sat back while Zelensky empowered, the radical right.
I mean, he arrested the opposition.
After
Yeah.
78% of the people voted for him. I mean, look, in Ukraine, it's hard to speak of democracy because, I mean, Zelensky, he was backed by an oligarch. I mean, again, it just comes down to special interest money, and they handpick somebody. But Zelensky was the wrong man for the job. Unable to sustain the promise that he made, and now he's sold his soul to everybody, especially NATO. And I mean, here's the ultimate issue here: NATO went all in back in April and May. NATO, for whatever reason, perceived Russian weakness when Russia, whatever happened in phase one, whether you view phase one as I do as more of a shaping the battlefield, maybe with a little effort up front to shock and awe Ukraine into surrendering, or if you're the Ukrainians in NATO and view phase one as the Russians making a go at Kiev and they got slapped back. However you want to view phase one, I mean, history will sort that out. Russia transitioned into phase two, and phase two was just there's no debating. The Russians just crushed the Ukrainians in phase two, grinding them down the Donbass. But for whatever reason, NATO viewed phase one as, oh my God, we found it. We found the chink in the Russian armor, and we're going to exploit it by pouring in tens of billions of dollars of military assistance. And so they doubled down. And the purpose of it wasn't to really help Ukraine win the war. The purpose was just to bleed Russia dry. The goal has always been, from the NATO perspective, to extend this conflict so that Russia sustains casualties, and it backfired. It's Ukraine that suffered, more than 60,000 dead. Not the Russians. Ukraine, and here's the thing: all that equipment that went in, it all got destroyed. It all got destroyed. I mean, when you pour in a lot, there's still some there, but there's nothing left in the NATO armory. Call up the Germans and ask them what else they got to send to Ukraine. The Germans are going, well, we don't have anything less unless we're taking everything that we need. The United States, we got nothing left to give them. We have to, the $12 billion that Congress has put out is for future weapons that have yet to be built, because we don't have anything left to give them. The Russians have literally ground through the NATO's military arsenal, and they're grinding through the Ukrainian manpower arsenal. And so NATO literally is at its weakest moment right now. Meanwhile, Russia has said, okay, we're partially mobilizing 300,000 men. There's no panic in Russia. Notice that. No panic. Where is the panic? Everywhere in Europe. They're all panicked. Zelensky's panicked. Schultz is panicked. Macron is desperately trying to take hold of Putin. I mean, there's nothing more embarrassing than a French president trying to make a phone call when no one picks up the phone. The United States is panicked. Jake Sullivan is on TV frantically, oh my God, if they use it, it's going to be catastrophic. Russia's not going to use a nuke. Why would Russia use a nuke against Ukraine? Russia's winning. What part of winning don't you understand? And as you alluded to, there is no calendar attached. The Russians aren't under any time constraints. Everybody else has a time constraint. Europe, well, they're all going to die this winter, either of cold or hunger. The United States, midterm elections, things of that nature. NATO, absolutely irrelevant, no equipment left. Ukraine, I mean, Zelensky's days are numbered. When Time Magazine puts the defense minister, who's had an ongoing feud with Zelensky, and they put the defense minister on the cover of their magazine, that tells you that Zelensky's star is on the way down. So Zelensky's in a panic. Everybody's panic. The only person not panicking is Putin, Shoigu, Gerasimov. None of them are panicking. Even when they're confronted with, bad news. I mean, it turns out that there was corruption in Russia, that there were some military commissars who pocketed the money and didn't update the stores. So when the reservists showed up to mobilize, they got rusty weapons. I mean, but what did Russia do? Fired the commissar, brought in a new guy, took out the old weapons, brought in the new weapons, and continued moving as if nothing. There's no panic. I mean, what is panicking? 250,000 Russian men fleeing the country. Okay, that's
yeah, but that's like manufactured panic, sort of like what I call the toilet paper people.
Sure.
They all ran to the store and bought all the toilet paper and towels because Twitter was freaking out. So they thought, I can't. And there was no reason to do that. And in Russia earlier, they said, everybody should sell their ruble. Bet you regret doing that if you fell for
Bet
it.
you regret doing that now. But you know what happened?
There's no reason
What
to
happened
run.
with these 250,000? You know, people have to realize that Russia is not a dictatorship. That Putin, as strong as he is, has to stand for election, has to be elected. And when you look at the election results, you know, there's a solid 40% of the population that historically has not been aligned with Putin. You know, so, and then of that 40%, 20% are hardcore anti-Putin people. Now, in a nation of 150 million, 20% equates to 30 million people are against Putin. And of these 30 million, as you said, a lot of these guys, this is a manufactured crisis. Putin is not going after any of the Russian woke crowd. He doesn't want you. You know, Russian conscription is very, very selective. They only bring in 200,000 people a year in two different conscription waves, and only for a year each. Most of the people that are qualified for conscription get deferments. They either do it by going to school or getting a job, or they just say, I got a limp, my eye doesn't work, whatever they want to say. But my point is, if you've never served in the Russian military, you don't have a damn thing to worry about, because the Russians have a 25 million strong reserve pool of people who did serve in the military. And they're tapping into 1% of that, the people with the specific skill set necessary for the special military operation. So all the woke crowd that sits there in the bars and the cafes in Russia and woes the day, that they no longer can use their iPhone to buy IKEA on the internet. These are the ones panicking. These are the ones running. You know who's not running? The mujiks, the men, the guys who sat there and smoked paprosi and told dirty jokes and do whatever men do when they're in the military. And they sat there and they went, you want me to go back? Sign me up. And they're there. They're all there. Real men, men who believe in their country, men who are worthy of their country's name. And I'm not saying this as some pro-Russian guy. I'm saying this as a man. I have no use for woke little wimps who never had the guts to step up to the line and take the oath. But that's okay, because not everybody has to serve in the military. But when it comes time to defend your country, first of all, you're not under risk. Running away, just all you're doing is feeding a Western narrative by running away. You're not at risk of getting eliminated. Why not stay in Russia, work, and pay taxes? That's what a good citizen would do. These are bad citizens. And you have to ask yourself, why isn't Russia stopping them? Because it's a cleansing operation, baby. The Russians are saying, you don't want to be here? Go. Russia's not stopping anybody. Go. If you're due to be mobilized and you go, you're going to have a 10-year prison sentence waiting for you when you come back. If you're not due, when you come back, 20 years from now, your grandkids are going to ask you, where were you in the big war, Daddy? And you're not going to say shoveling poop in Louisiana, as Patton said. You're going to say, I ran away to Georgia. I ran away to Kazakhstan. And you're going to be forever branded with the Scarlet C. Coward.
A lot of the ones who are going were just going to have auxiliary roles anyway. Not that isn't important, but it's not like they're going to the front line with the artillery pieces. They'll be driving trucks, cooking, a lot of like nurses and doctors and other things. Another thing with these referendums, which are sure to pass, is the militia groups from Donetsk and Luhansk who've been fighting with the soldiers shoulder to shoulder. They're going to get Russian salaries, Russian health care, and all the Russian benefits you get from being a Russian citizen.
And Russian equipment.
That's the big
because
thing.
Right now the Donetsk militias and the Lugansk, some of the most experienced soldiers, by the way, they've been doing this for 8 years. They're operating on a wing and a prayer. The Russians gave them old equipment early on. They took old Soviet equipment from the Ukrainian army, and the Russians threw them this. But once they become Russia, these guys are going to immediately transition into the Russian military, and you're going to be seeing top-notch equipment coming their way, and that's going to bring about a qualitative, increase in combat capability. I think NATO tried to change. I call this. I wasn't on your show when I said it, but I've been saying since May that this was a game changer when NATO decided to pour in tens of billions of dollars.
You told me in person.
Yeah.
You told me you talked about Tom Brady, and we were at
Yeah.
at the Ron Paul Institute in a restaurant, I believe, and I remember
Yeah.
you saying that.
I said it's a game changer. They basically, the quarterback got injured and they brought in, they had a scrub quarterback. They brought in Tom Brady. It's a game changer. It doesn't mean they're going to win the game, but it changed the game. And Russia has to adapt. Well, Russia just did by changing the game. You see, Ukraine thought they were playing soccer, and Russia came back and said, "No, we're playing hockey." And because that's what happened when they basically create Russia. They're taking these four Ukrainian oblasts, provinces, and by the end of this month, they're going to be Mother Russia. And that fundamentally changes the game 110%. And NATO knows that. That's why, even though Stoltenberg continues to spout nonsense, because a lot of people think that Stoltenberg, being the Secretary General of NATO, um, is somebody who has authority. He has no authority. He is literally a bureaucrat who administers the technical aspects of the Secretariat, the day-to-day management. But NATO is a military alliance, and the people that make the military decisions aren't named Stoltenberg. They sit on something called the Military Committee. And what did the Military Committee do the moment Russia started mobilizing in the referendum? They immediately publicly said, we don't want war with Russia. We are not looking for a war with Russia. We don't want war with Russia. I don't know what the dude from Norway is saying, but he don't speak for NATO because we're the ones that count. No war with Russia. Now, they may continue to supply weaponry and everything, but NATO doesn't want to fight because Russia just changed the game. The only one that's going to be left out, of course, sadly, for the Ukrainian people is the Ukrainian government. I mean, Zelensky is panicked. He's talking about, Russians preemptively using nuclear weapons on him, and he's saying it's okay. I'm willing to take the hit. What kind of idiot says that? What kind of leader says I'm willing to take the nuke for the cause? Ask the Japanese if it was worth taking the nuke. It's not.
Nope.
So right. You live in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
There are long-term consequences for getting nuked. First of all, Russia doesn't want to nuke him, but second of all, just the mindset, the suicidal mindset of a national leader that says it's okay. I'll take the nuke for the larger cause.
How do you think how the public in Ukraine felt about that? We'll take the nuke. No, thank you. I mean, you're asking to get assassinated talking like that. A lot of his words, some of it's him, some of it's probably CIA. I mean, that line about, I need ammo, not a ride. He didn't say that.
That's CIA. No, CIA wrote that script. If CIA, if you look for it, you won't find him saying it. The source is an anonymous intelligence official at the U.S. Embassy. So the CIA made it up. Yeah.
Kind of like anthrax and WMDs and many other things. Signal intelligence from Gulf of Tonkin. I laugh about that because it's so disturbing that I've crossed full circle where I'm just laughing at the absurdity because that was so pointless. And there's still cluster bombs and munitions in Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. I mean, what a disaster. And now we got Zelensky. It looks like France is going to become the second largest country in Europe in about 3 days. The results are sort of in. I mean, they've had over 73% of the vote, and of that, 93% have voted to join Russia. So even if every single person votes otherwise, the referendums have already passed. But I assume the announcement will be October 1st.
I think it's actually going to be sooner. The 27th is tomorrow. I think the referendum ends tomorrow. I think they'll count the votes on the 28th, so we'll have the results by the 28th.
Oh, they don't take a month to count like the U.S. elections?
No. These are actually real elections with real results. And you'll see there's no ballot stuffing. There's none of this. Everything was done right. Voter ID. It's amazing how if you have voter ID, people. But
nobody told him that was racist. Isn't voter ID racist? That's what we
showing
hear.
Up in person to vote. Actually showing up and saying, "This is me. This is my ID. Check my name off the list. I sign here. Cast my vote. That's it." It's amazing how that works and how quickly they can tabulate the votes. And then the parliament, the Russian parliament, is already front loaded. So I think the request will be, the results we sent to Parliament. The Parliament's going to be an instant approval,
Mm.
Putin is going to be instant. And so, it's either going to be September 30th or October 1st. It's going to be, like you said, France is going to become the second largest country in Europe.
I had some questions about that because this goes from Kherson all the way to Donbass. But I'm thinking, what is the fate of Odessa? They're getting hit with these Iranian kamikaze.
Iranian drones, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the
That,
fate of
that also
Odessa
happened to me too. Why didn't Russia have more drones in the beginning? They just planned incorrectly, or
was it's curious because I brought that up in one of my interviews on the Scott Ritter show, which I have to say, just as an aside, I didn't want to do it at first. They approached me. The sponsor is Soloviev Live, and Soloviev is a very outspoken, somewhat controversial figure. I mean, a lot of people view him as a shill for Putin and things of that nature. I again, your shirt says it all. I think the more speech, the better, and leave it up to the audience to sort things out.
right?
So I'm not against Soloviev speaking. I'm not against anybody speaking. It's the duty and responsibility of the audience to be a little bit more discerning and have their filters in place. But they approached me. They said, "Would you like to do a show?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, why?" I thought your whole idea was to get information out. And I said, "Well, I'm just concerned that I'm already being called a Russian propagandist, and I just said it just seems that I'd be giving ammunition to people." They said, "No, here's the deal. It's your show, literally your show. We will find some of the most interesting people in Russia, and you get to interview them any way you want to. We don't have any say whatsoever in how you do it, what you say, the questions you ask." And I said, "Okay, I'll give it a shot." Every interview I've done so far has been newsmaking. If I were a CNN reporter, I'd be winning Emmys and Grammys or whatever the hell they win. The things I've been able to
Did you say Pentagon
extract.
reporter? CNN?
Pardon?
Did you say Pentagon reporter when you said CNN? Yeah, I knew the answer to the drone question. I was just trying to segue to the Scott Ritter show so that give you an opportunity to say, because you got that information out. All those shows have been stellar, and you're getting info that no one has ever had. No one, no one's digging these things up. You have access to it. And isn't it sad? Because I'm a Reagan youth. I grew up in the 80s. You were an adult in the 80s. If someone had told me then that I would be having to go on Russian Telegram and Russian VK and do shows on Russia and talk on RT to have free speech, I would have done a backflip. Like, no way.
Yeah.
No way. It was still the Soviet Union back then, too. But here I am. Well, I used to talk on RT, not anymore. But yeah, I'm not even allowed on that anymore. But I'm using Telegram and VK and, all the Russian stuff because
It's
not allowed to talk anywhere else.
There's no talk anywhere else. You can't talk anywhere else. Twitter has become totally owned by the Ukrainian intelligence service. If you don't toe the line on Twitter, you're done. YouTube deplatforms you instantly. I mean, my videos go up.
I'm champion.
My videos go up and within an hour or so, they're gone. You can't search for them. They alter the algorithms. It's very difficult for people to do the searches. This country's gone insane. I mean, free speech is the foundation. It's the cornerstone of American democracy, and we've literally banned it. In my situation, and others, I'm not saying it's just me alone, but to be singled out by a Ukrainian governmental entity, the Center for Countering Disinformation, is one thing. I mean, I expect Ukrainians not to be happy about things I say because I speak based with fact-based analysis, and they operate with CIA spin. But the fact that they're funded by the United States Congress, who pays their salaries, the fact that the State Department organizes their meetings, sits in when they publish a list calling American citizens information terrorists and war criminals for the audacity of speaking their mind, and then to have you to be put on the Mirotvorets hit list, the assassination list, the one that actually people die, and then to have videos come out and say that the Ukrainians are coming for me. I mean, they published a video. I think it's not the real thing because I respect the Ukrainian intelligence service a little bit more than this. But then I don't know what happens in your chat rooms, but when I go on shows, there's the comments come in. Ritter go boom boom. We're going to get Ritter and his family. They're going to die. Look, for what? Freedom of speech, and the U.S. government is supporting this, sustaining this. This is the United States Congress passing a law, Public Law 117-128, authorizing money to be allocated to resources designed to suppress free speech here in America. It just so happens that the resources are outside the country, but it's doing by proxy what the Constitution forbids here in the United States. This is a travesty, a travesty.
Yeah, I got called a neo-Nazi on Israeli television, and one could argue, and I'm not. One could argue, obviously, one could argue that's tax funded paid too, since we send them so much foreign aid. We agree with George Washington. If freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent, we may be led like sheep to the slaughter.
And we are being led by like sheep to the shot.
Well, George Washington was right. Yeah, exactly. Like he was. Every single war starts with lies. As you very well know, you were one of the only voices back in 2002, 2003 saying they don't have WMDs. Well, they did, but they don't have them now. And you guys are lying. But the OSP and PNAC and all these other groups, Blitzer was a former APAC employee, and they get on there and just lied. Every single conflict, they lied about Syria. They're lying about Ukraine. They lied about Libya. They lied about Iraq. If we have free speech and you struck the root and they weren't allowed to use deception, none of these other evils would come after it. That's why this is the most important meta issue, because if they can't lie, then they can't murder, they can't steal, they can't blow things up, they can't starve children with sanctions. All of it starts with deception, and the deception's allowed because we don't have a free press.
No, we don't. And here's the thing. I mean, thank God for shows like yours and others. But, the fact of the matter is your quality control is you. I mean, and there's the good thing about the internet and the bad thing about the internet is that the internet is literally, it's the wild, wild west of information. And it's incumbent upon the user to construct the proper filters, to do the due diligence, so to speak, and not many people don't. Many people just get sucked in this way, that way, the other way, and the end result is a very, very confused, because people are saying, well, we know that mainstream media is corrupt. We know that. We know mainstream media is not going to tell the truth. They're going to tell the government lies.
But it's even goofier, like Jones. Well, what happens, since you're not allowed to have dialogue on the internet, it creates a bunch of yes men circles, these echo chambers. And so people will rightly get skeptical of the government, but then they get sucked in by some other charlatan that's just as crazy or worse. And they're never hearing the counter argument because those people aren't allowed, above ground. And so you get some real, I'm not going to give examples, but you know what I mean? There's some really
I know exactly what you're talking about. My whole philosophy on in this is not to be in the monologue business.
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot of pressure for me to be in the monologue business. People want me to talk, but I prefer to be in the dialogue business. I prefer to be in and I prefer that the dialogue not be among like-minded people, because then it's just the choir is singing, and it's beautiful to people that want to hear that, but it's not satisfying to people who are looking for solutions or to be challenged. I think there has to be more debate.
But if you talk to people who you disagree with, it's guilt by association. Oh, why did you talk to so-and-so? That makes you that person. Like, how doesn't it make that person me? How come that doesn't work the other way?
But why do I have to be them? Why do them have to be? Why can't it be just me having a discussion? But here's the other thing too. The internet, it seems, has stripped away people's ability to be mature. And what I mean by that is, I have no problem, to be honest, Ryan. If tonight I say something, you go, "Oh, Scott, no, man, I fact checked that, and you're off." I'd go, Okay, let me go back on that one. I have no problem being called out. I have no problem being corrected because at the end of the day, I'm not here to hear the sound of my voice. I'm
Oh,
here
I
to
have no
try.
problem correcting people.
Yeah, yeah, no, and you have to. But why do people have to take everything personally? If you're in the business of providing the most accurate information possible, then you should never ever. I mean, the only thing, if you corrected me, the only thing it would do to me is say, "My God, the next time I open my mouth, I better get my act better. I better get my act together before I go forward with this to be better prepared, etc." But
Well,
you know,
unfortunately, most people don't think the way we do. They care about who is right more than what is right, and
yeah,
no
I
one's
mean
just
that
going to get everything right on one
scoring
shot.
points.
You have to have dialogue and you revise, and then you make a better hypothesis, and then you hear feedback and you revise, and you get better and better theories on things. Like I was asking you about Dugway and anthrax and stuff. I knew about Fort Detrick. I knew about Ames. I'd heard you mention it offhand, and I won't get into that whole discussion, but I talked to you in Texas about it and go, huh, that plugged in a hole for me. Then I was able to go back and make it even better. It didn't really change the conclusion I had, but it gave me a better understanding. You got to have dialogue with everybody, but
One
we
hundred
the
percent.
internet allows for anonymity, so people can just act the worst with
Keyboard
no
warriors, man.
consequence.
Keyboard warriors. Yeah,
Yes,
they're
exactly.
brave. There's some very brave people out there, apparently, because the words they use can only come from a bold individual, not
Mhm.
some. Never mind, I won't say it. But look, my approach is, and I say this often. Um, I tell people when I speak, I'd like you to start the evening by viewing me as a Russian disinformation agent. And my job tonight is to spread vile lies about everything. I want you to question everything I say. I don't want you to take anything I say at face value. I want you to challenge everything, go back, double check, triple check me, because in that way you actually empower yourself because now you've engaged in a process of education, of learning. But if all you do is sit there and nod your head when somebody speaks, you're not learning anything. You're just, it becomes rote memory.
Oh,
So,
I agree. If you remember, I handed you some maps in person. I'm like, look, here's a bunch of names, like, because people don't know what they might not know. Like, go debunk it. Now you got all the names. You have things you can research. Come back at me, right?
come
I do
back.
that
Yeah.
with everybody because I want to figure out what's true. That's all I
Yeah.
care about.
That's right. We don't have, I don't think, a lot of people are like, oh, Scott, you're very pro Russian. Well, first of all, I'm not anti Russian. I'll just say that. I'm not a Russophobe. Um, but when you say pro Russian, not really. I'm very capable of being critical of Russia. You know, if and when the situation calls for it, I could be critical of anybody, of anything. But on the issue of Ukraine, Russia just happens to be on the right side of history.
Mhm.
And if you're a fact-driven person, the reality is when you examine each one of these tentacles that got us to this conflict, you realize that Russia was doing it the right way. NATO and the United States were doing it the wrong way. And it doesn't make you pro-Russian to to say that. I would love nothing more than my country every once in a while to rise up and I go, boom, they did it right. Look, America did it right. But it's not. It's like you said, it's whether you want to call it the reverse Midas, I call it the American curse. Literally, anything we touch dies. Everything we touch dies. I challenge
Time to clean
anybody
our
to come up
cabinet.
with an American. I challenge anybody to come up with an American success, foreign policy wise or national security wise, in the last 20, 30 years. Just one. I really want to hear it. We might have done some humanitarian stuff when volcanoes came up, but we undo it. Like in Pakistan, we send troops in to help people there, and God bless the troops. But while they're doing that, the CIA is running around doing a vaccine program, trying to to find Osama bin Laden. That ends up getting the doctor that was doing it arrested. And I mean, everything we touch dies. We don't have the ability to do anything for the benefit of others. We are a selfish global hegemon, and we deserve what we get.
Well, we don't really have like the James Bakers. We don't really have that level of intellectual statesmanship anymore. We have Kamala Harris, Blinken, Victoria Nuland, people that it's embarrassed. We have a president, we have a commander in chief that shakes hands with invisible people and can't find his way off a stage. We have a vice president that tells us things like Russia's a big country and viruses are very, very small. We have go down the State Department. You can go yelling at the Treasury. Like they're all morons. They're not even normal. You're like, nah, are they really that incompetent? Yes. And who's the adult? You got to dig way down, Burns, I guess. Like, where's the
Burns is the biggest adult we have in the room right now. I
that's
mean,
sad. That's a low bar.
that's a low bar, and he's CIA, which means he's corrupted. I'm just sorry, the CIA is just a corrupt organization. But look at Blinken. Even Wolf Blitzer, Mr. APAC, asked him a question. He said it was a good question. I give Wolf solid, chops for this one. He said, you're criticizing Russia and the annexation of Crimea and the coming annexation. He said, but what about Israel and the Golan Heights? And Blinken, he said, isn't there a double standard? Blinken, well, setting aside the legalities of this question, the Golan Heights are very important to the security of Israel so long as Syria is ruled by Bashar al-Assad. Okay, full stop. What did Blinken, the Secretary of State of the United States, just say? That there are situations where nations are allowed to annex territory because otherwise that territory would pose an existential threat to them because of a given situation. So now we go to Russia and Novaya Russia, these four things. Is not NATO's expansion into Ukraine, is not Ukraine being governed by a Nazi regime that has spent the last 8 years dedicated to the sole task of killing Russians, subjugating Russian people in this area? Does that not qualify as an existential threat greater than or equal to the threat posed by Syria's Bashar al-Assad to the Golan Heights? Did not Blinken just make the case for Russian annexation of Donbass? And the answer is yes, he did.
Yeah, Syria doesn't land wrap Jews the Poles and strip them naked and break the bones.
No. I know. Look. I'm just saying that intellectually he made the case. Yeah,
I get it. I agree, and I think Wolf Blitzer was only asking that to be like, yeah, but what about Israel? You're still good for us, right? It's pretty sick.
No, but it didn't work because Blinken basically, look, I've always called him, Blinken and Nod because he's just literally one of the dumbest people on the planet.
He's Douglas level stupid.
He is right up there.
I wish I had the audio clip from Colonel Wilkerson. You know what I'm talking about, guys? Yeah. Douglas Fife. Some people call it seldom in my life have I met a dumber man.
No, he is. Well, but I'll tell you who is dumber? Jake Sullivan. I mean, he's a propagandist. He's the spin meister for Hillary Clinton, and he's now the national security advisor of the United States with no national security experience. All he does is spin, and he spins.
Jean Pierre level dumb, and she's about the bottom. Our new press secretary. I thought you couldn't get worse than Psaki, and I was interviewing a guy, a Russian speaker. He's American, but he used to live in Russia. And he said that in Russia, the Psaki is now a verb to mean foobar. Like, that got Psaki'd.
They got Psaki'd. Well, I tell you what. Again, my mom raised me not to say anything bad about people, but she was bad. She was bad when she was the State Department spokesperson under Obama, and she was horrible being the White House spokesperson. He is she operates with an intellectual deficit, and frankly speaking, her moral compass is off because this is a woman who is clearly smart enough to know that what she's saying is just an abject lie, and yet she'll say it, and she'll say it, and she'll say it, and she's not even clever. I don't know. Look, the Russians. One thing I'll say about the Russians, and I had this experience when I was with the United Nations. I worked with a fairly senior Russian diplomat who I have a lot of respect for. And he and I worked together on a lot of inspections. And he would listen to me speak, and he would listen to, other people speak. And he would just sit there and grit his teeth. And finally, at one point in time, he stopped me and he said, "Scott, words have meaning. Words have meaning. And when you say things, there are consequences for your words. You have to be very careful with your language. And I'm very careful with the books I write, but I'm more careful with the books I write than I am with the stuff I say. But his point was, you need to be very careful with what you say because the words have meaning. There's consequences to the words that you use. And if you look at the Russians very rarely fumble with language when they speak. It's generally very careful, very couched, very guarded. Which means you can generally take what they say to the bank. It's only in the West where we say ridiculous, stupid things and continuously have to bring them back in because we allowed ourselves to get, ahead of our proverbial skis. And that's what you can't be a White House spokesperson and lie. I guess you can, but you shouldn't be. Or not have your facts together, not know the issue cold. I mean, this new lady, sometimes she's speaking and you're just saying, do you even know what you're talking about? And the answer is no, she doesn't.
Do you think that's on purpose? They just pick the most incompetent person, just like, don't even ask us because this is all you're going to get. It's like the Prince Andrew interview. It's just such a train wreck that you just know he's full of it, but you don't know what to do with it. Like, they're too stupid to even reason with. And that's
No,
a clever way of making a wall and say, you're not getting any access to us because we're just going to put this idiot here who's going to, you'll ask a question and they're just going to answer what they wanted to answer on some other.
That is a tactic, but I don't know. I got to be careful. I just think that this was a very woke appointment, and that there were attributes other than qualification for the job that were considered in appointing this person to the job. And frankly speaking, again, I say this as an American who believes that every American should be treated with respect, regardless of whatever you want to say. I don't care about your sexual orientation. I don't care about whether you want to wear dresses. I don't care. You're an American. Do what you want to do as long as you're not hurting anybody else. But don't let
when you favor certain groups just because they check certain boxes on the woman,
and you got a problem.
Whatever.
Then you have a problem.
Undermining their credibility, and you're also being prejudiced at people who would have been more qualified but didn't have the right checkbox.
Life is meant to be, Darwin made it clear. Life is meritocracy. The strongest survive. The best qualified rise to the top. That's the way it should be. But unfortunately, that's not the way it is. And I think the Biden White House proves that. They've literally appointed some of the singularly most incompetent people possible. I mean, I couldn't think of a worse person. Well, I can think of a worse person for Secretary of State, but Blinken is right there with the worst Secretary of State ever.
And that's helpful.
Again, I have to be careful because I don't want to get in trouble. But look, the bottom line is, even look at the Secretary of Defense. I mean, of all the generals, if you wanted to pick a general officer to be Secretary of Defense, which is a mistake, I believe in the civilian leadership of the military is an absolute. And I don't think you should be a former 4-star general, especially one so recently removed from active duty. But if you were going to do that, why him? Don't answer that question.
I'd pick McGregor. That way.
Well, you could pick a lot of people, but
I'd pick my neighbor. I'd pick Lloyd Austin, and my neighbor doesn't speak English.
He's literally the worst qualified person to be Secretary of Defense. I mean, Ash Carter, I had no use for Ash Carter, none whatsoever. Ash Carter was a better Secretary of Defense than Lloyd Austin.
By the way, we have a quick commercial from DOD, not from Raytheon this time, but a competitor. Here we go. It'll be real fast.
No problem.
Reed Martin, proud producer and proprietor, patriotic projectile party poppers. Got some uppity brown people making trouble for your empire? Replace them with a charred freighter and a cloud of white smoke. So remember, if your next geostrategic boondoggle's going awry, don't call us, we'll call you.
And that does sum it up, because it is MIC profiteering and nepotism that puts these people in these positions. But 100%. What happens when there's a real conflict? It's not just about selling Tomahawk missiles or whatever, or your Patriot missile system. It's, hey, this is serious. We can't have morons in all these positions, and there are lobbyists. I was talking to Larry Johnson. He lives up in Nova, and or maybe it was Giraldi, whatever. Somebody was telling me this story about these lobbyists that didn't have a clue, didn't think forward, like what's going to happen when you sell all these, and there's black markets in Ukraine, and stingers and man pads and javelins just end up all over the Middle East. They didn't think about the 2 days ahead. They just, well, what's the bottom line? How much are we going to sell? What can we make? They don't even hate Russians, hate Ukrainians. They're just like, this is good for business. That's all they think about.
That's all they care. Look, the United States, we are fundamentally broke when it comes to defense procurement. We have created a system that's designed to enrich defense industry at the expense of the American soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine. The equipment that's being produced is criminally bad. Criminally bad.
You didn't like the Bradley fighting vehicle? The Bradley fighting vehicle made of aluminum? It wasn't a good investment?
No, it's not good. Neither is the F-35, one of the biggest wastes of money in the history. The F-22 is not a very good fighter. How about the Gerald Ford, which has a new electric catapult system that doesn't work?
I wrote a book about it where I trashed the F-35 and the F-22 Raptor.
They're horrible airplanes. Horrible airplanes that literally will end up getting Americans killed because we build a doctrine. We have to fool ourselves when you design these weapons. We create a weapon system, the F-35, that's supposed to do all this stuff and do it at a level beyond which the Russians can do. So then we create doctrine that's built around assumptions of supremacy, assumptions of competence, of technical capabilities, that when reality hits, we can't perform to that level, and the doctrine's all wrong, and we're going to get slaughtered on the battlefield. It would be better if we just, again, if they would approach people who knew war. The first thing you learn about war is simplicity is king. That war sucks for complexity, complex technology.
Like the camouflage color. It's not good in any particular environment unless you're laying in a pit of gravel, maybe. But you look at it, it's like, well, they paid Ralph Lauren X number of dollars for this particular
to do this thing.
John Kerry was in it, and and they don't care about
everything. Everything we do. Everything we do is bad. The M777, the howitzer. We decided it needed to be able to be rapidly deployed, so we put in a lot of titanium parts. The problem is the titanium may be lighter, but it's actually more fragile. It tends to crack under stress, especially in combat. Imagine that if you test it using a sustained rate of fire of X rounds per minute, but in combat against the Russians, you're going to need to almost double that. So you're boom, 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 crack. Oh, so now to make it more sturdy, you have to change. And this is after you bought it. You have to change everything, but now you can't deploy it on the helicopters because it weighs too much. And that's what we do. We are so stupid. We are so fundamentally corrupt and immoral.
Simple solution.
Say again?
There's a simple solution. Just don't send it enough ammo.
Yeah. Well, we don't, by the way. We're going to find out if we ever go to war. We don't have enough ammo. But, I'm not here to say that the Russians are perfect. They're not. But I will tell you this. The Russian defense industry lacks the profit motive. Their goal is to produce a solid piece of equipment. That doesn't mean they make mistakes. I mean, there a lot of people have criticized some of this new, some of the new Russian armored fighting vehicles that are coming out as being too complex, and it takes too long to build them. They can't mass produce them. The T-14 tank has some problems. The Su-57 aircraft had some engine problems. So I'm not saying the Russians are immune to this, but you'll never find the Russians producing an F-35. You just won't find them producing an F-35.
This is not a Marine or anything, but they're talking about Leopard 2s or Abrams. Isn't that a 70-ton tank? How's that going to do in the mud?
It'll get hit and blow up, and the people inside will die. That's how it'll do.
I mean, I thought that's why Russia doesn't build 70-ton tanks. It's not good for that environment.
Well, it's also a 70-ton tank is it's the idea of having more armor, because the weight comes from the armor plate and the big engine and the need to protect it. But today's weaponry just cuts through that stuff like that's why there's all this applique armor. That's why the Russians don't just have applique armor. They now have a system that will shoot like a shotgun shell burst out there to prematurely detonate it before it comes in. So when you see a Russian tank get hit, it looks spectacular on the video. It's boom, big flash of orange. But what you don't realize is, that's the Russians. It's the Russian tank blowing itself up to destroy the round coming in. The Russians have some very solid technology that hasn't been fully employed in the Ukraine front. And when the time comes, I think the world is going to be introduced to the harsh reality of what large-scale ground combat in Europe by a Russian army that is employing its doctrine to the full extent of the intent of the doctrine. Because Russia hasn't done it. Everything Russia's done so far in Ukraine has been a deviation from doctrine. They're not fighting the way they train. They're not fighting the way they were organized. They've made adaptations because of the special military operation, et cetera. But this next round of fighting, this new game, is going to be once the 300,000 come in, and these are reserve units. They're going to protect the border, and they're going to provide strategic depth to the front. That's going to free up all the knuckle draggers now to come together and form themselves into the units that they're supposed to be in and employ themselves doctrinally. And get a stick of butter, take a knife, heat it up red hot, see how quick the knife goes through the butter. That's what's going to happen to the Ukrainian army. First of all, the Ukrainian army isn't what it used to be. When this war started, the Ukrainian army is very well trained, well led. These guys, over 50% of their active duty forces are either dead or wounded.
Sadly,
the guys that are left are shell shocked, numbed, scattered, diluted. Their effectiveness is diluted because they're bringing in untrained troops. All of the equipment they started with, all the equipment that they trained on, has been destroyed by the Russians. They now have to bring in this NATO equipment, which they're not trained on. They're not combat. The sad thing, there was a videotape that showed, the Ukrainians, 25 Ukrainian armored vehicles, and these were, all NATO provided vehicles, Polish T-72 tanks, Dutch, a variant of the M113 going in there, and these guys started getting hit. And doctrinally, when a column gets hit, doctrinally you want to go herringbone, which is
right.
Face out and begin to look for what's shooting at you, lay down suppressive fire, then begin bounding Overwatch, all this. These guys started spinning in circles, running into each other, and they create these giant traffic jams where the vehicles are all nose to nose, they can't move, and then the artillery comes down and wipes them out, and they lost everything. This is the state of the Ukrainian military. You can give them equipment, but unless they spend, a lot of time learning how to use this equipment, then employing it properly per doctrine, per tact, with sound tactics, all they do is get slaughtered. And that's what happens every time they go up against the Russians right now. They're getting slaughtered.
We do have a mathematician that can give us the odds on them winning. Let's just check into Scott Steiner.
Samoa Joe, you take your 33 and a third chance minus my 25% chance, and you got an 8 1/3 chance of winning at sacrifice. But then you take my 75% chance of winning. If we used to go one-on-one and then add 66 2/3%, I got 141 2/3 chance of winning at sacrifice. See, Joe, the numbers don't lie, and they spell disaster for you at sacrifice.
Here you go, Joe Biden. The numbers don't lie, and they spell disaster. You can't argue with Scott Steiner. I sure wouldn't.
Well, no, not to his face.
Hell no.
Maybe with the anonymity that comes with the internet, I could become a keyboard warrior and snipe at him. But
I sent I'm friends with a lot of UFC people. I used to train martial artists, and I sent a particular video to Don Fry. It was pretty woke, let's just say, just because I wanted to see his reaction. And he emailed me back just a real short email and said, Ryan, if you ever send me a video like that again, I'm going to show up at your house. Japan with a Magnum, and he had a picture of a gun on the table. I was like, oh yeah. So I sent him another one.
Yeah, well,
Manfry is if people don't know who that is, it's well, just go look up his fights. It's pretty much a straight right hand over and over again. But yeah, I just
simplicity is the key.
It's trying to be funny, trying to break up the heaviness of everything. But I wish we would get more into just American pop culture, pro wrestling, fun things. Why do we have to murder people all over the globe? It's sad. It's unnecessary. And for what? It's not in American interest. It's like, okay, we get NATO. Why do we have beef with Russia? Are they just the hegemon in the way? Say, well, if we get rid of them, then what? You get on to China. Like, what's the plan? There is no plan.
Well, there is no plan. I mean, at the end of the Cold War, the plan was for the United States to exploit its newly won status of the world's strongest democracy to create what has developed into what they call the rules-based international order. It's purely a mechanism designed to empower the United States across the board. And basically, we've turned, all of our erstwhile allies into, subjects, and they only can do what we tell them to do. And we did this because we needed to, even though one of the days I'll finish the book I'm writing about NATO, just to, and one of the points that I make is that there was no Soviet threat. It's just totally a manufactured. But the Soviet Union posed a threat to nobody at the end of the Second World War. But we had to manufacture that in order to create a threat that enabled us to create a system that could hold Europe hostage for the next, 70 years. And that's just a statement of fact. And I'm sorry, Europe, you suck as a continent. But the fact is,
no, you're right. Operation Washtub, for example, where the CIA planted its own weapons and then pointed to it and go, aha, look what the Soviets are doing, knowing that there were no communists, knowing that these are our own guns, just as a pretext to mess with Latin America. Like, it was a theme by which to expand military prowess and exploit other nations economically.
Yeah, well, and look at, the Soviet Union, put my book up one more time. I just want to make a point on this one. Not for people to buy it, although if you want to buy it, that you're never going to get me to say no.
Sold out.
But it did, and they're trying to print more right now, so it's doing okay. But Ronald Reagan, that moment right there, Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev, that is the signing of the INF Treaty, December 8th of 1987, and for the next year. That was the high watermark of arms control. What I mean is, Reagan actually believed in a sincere bilateral disarmament effort between peers. He viewed the Soviet Union as a peer force, et cetera. But then when Reagan left and George Herbert Walker Bush came in, one of the first things, and I discussed this in the book, Jack Matlock was the U.S. ambassador at the time to the Soviet Union. And he was telling, anybody who would listen, hey, Gorbachev is actually serious about this perestroika stuff, but it ain't working. So he needs help. He needs help two ways. One, he needs you to come in with more arms control so he can alleviate the pressures put on the Soviet economy by defense industry, this mad spending on missiles. And two, when you do that, he's going to need an infusion of economic assistance so that he can offset economically and domestically, politically, the vacuum that's created when you stop producing these missiles. And for whatever reason, George Herbert Walker Bush, who was vice president for 8 years and knew exactly what Reagan was trying to do, he hit the pause button. He hit the pause, and by the time he engaged, it was too late. Gorbachev was on his way out, and this dude named Yeltsin came in, and Yeltsin for the next 10 years was an absolute disaster for Russia. But that's what the United States wanted. Ask yourself, why did James Baker, what happened to James Baker after he had that conversation with Shevardnadze and Gorbachev saying not 1 inch eastward? He went back to Washington, D.C. and said, hey, guys, I just gave a verbal assurance to the Soviets that we're not going to move, expand NATO. And they went, nope, nope, nope. We are expanding NATO because the purpose of NATO has transitioned from preventing the Soviet move on the West to keeping the Soviet Union, the Russians, down in perpetuity. We never are going, they are a defeated country. We won the Cold War. We're never going to let them up. We're going to keep our foot on their throat. And for the next decade, we economically raped them. I hate that word, but I'm going to use it. We raped Russia economically for our sole advantage. And we went in and we neutered them politically. We talk about Russia being a democracy. There was nothing democratic that happened in Russia in the 1990s. We accused the Russians of trying to steal an election in 2016, which is totally a fabricated narrative. We don't need to get into that. Christopher Steele, the whole thing. But, in
Well, they
1996,
put bounties on the heads of soldiers in Afghanistan. They made
yeah,
their Biden laptop
everything.
stuff. They made my coffee cold in the morning. It was all Russia.
Well, that I might believe because they are dicks that way. No, the point is the coffee cold. Shame on you, Russia. But the point is, we bragged about what we stole an election in 1996. Boris Yeltsin would never have won the 1990. He didn't win the 1996 election. We stole it and we bragged about it. Time magazine, the best election money can buy. We brag about how we stole that. And then we wonder why the Russians don't trust us anymore.
I'm pretty sure Yegor Geiger was installed with them too, the prime minister of Russia. He was just, Yeltsin was a drunk and Yegor Geiger was just allowing the oligarchs to swallow everything. Boris Berezovsky.
But he was operating off of a script written by Jeffrey Sachs and others. I know Jeffrey's out there doing God's work today on Ukraine, but hey, Jeff, we know what you did in the 1990s. You know who else was a senator in the 1990s? Michael McFaul.
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm talking about these neoliberals. It's easy to pick on the neoconservatives, but there's all these neoliberals, goody goods. Michael McFaul, he was in there, selling the Yeltsin, medicine but it was all about empowering the United States. All these experts, all these, Fiona Hills, Angela Stentz, the whole work, they don't know anything about Russia. I'm just going to say straight up, I challenge them, any one of them, to a debate about Russian history, Russian foreign policy, anything. They can't get past Putin is an autocrat, Putin is a dictator, Putin is bad. That's the totality of their intellectual discourse on Russia today. That's it. Those three things. They don't know anything else. The second you ask them to dig a little bit deeper, they get confused. They get a blank look on their face and they start to mumble incoherently.
They're NPCs. It's like, oh, what's the next new thing? Put 6 jabs in your arm, free Tibet. Now it's the Kurds. Then it's the Yazidi. Then it's and you've never mentioned any of these groups until yesterday, and now you're waving around a Ukrainian flag. It's disingenuous and insincere. Yeah. It's just like, oh, this is the new trend. Let's get on the trend. Wave this flag. Tomorrow it'll be some other thing. And equivalent events have happened. They're Yemen, Syria, Libya, that nothing, right? But and Ukraine too, from 2014 until last February. What are they just, as Thomas Sowell says, you're always starting a story in the middle. They bossed with heavy artillery on February 17th. Russia came in on the 24th as a reaction to them breaking the Minsk agreement. They knew it.
Well, they didn't break the Minsk agreement. They never ratified it. That was the whole frustration of Russia. Ratify the damn agreement. And they refused to. They kept promising. Now we know from Petroshenko, they never intended to. It was always to buy time for NATO to build this army. It was going to go in. I had an interesting conversation with Khodakovsky was the gentleman's last name, Alexander Khodakovsky. He was a commander of the Vostok Battalion, the Dnieper, in the Donetsk People's Militia. And he's been fighting this, but he used to be a Ukrainian SBU, intelligence officer. And I used the term Russian separatist, and he said, stop, we're not separatists. Don't call us separatists. He said, we had a duly elected president, Viktor Yanukovych. He was the legitimate president. He was overthrown by a coup, a CIA-backed coup by neo-Nazis that came in and threw it. He said, I was a Ukrainian, employee. I worked for the Ukrainian government, the real Ukrainian government, Yanukovych's government. And we went to the Donbass, and we're not separatists. We were the ones defending the real Ukraine. We were defending the legitimate government of Ukraine. We refused to buy into this coup d'etat of the Nazis. So don't call us separatists. We're Ukrainian patriots. And we now are going to become Russian patriots because Ukraine has abandoned us. Ukraine attacked us.
Yeah.
But the last thing we are is Russian separatists. He totally, and I listened to him and I went, you know what? He's actually historically correct. I mean, to use this term separatists would the second, and that's why we come back to words have meaning. Words have importance. If you use the term Russian separatist in one fell swoop, you legitimize Maidan. You see what happens there? So he's absolutely right.
That's why I don't see annexation. It's not an annexation. It's secession. They voted to leave. Crimea. They didn't annex that. They seceded.
It's a legitimate legitimate referendum. It's basically it's called self-determination. I think that's actually enshrined in the United Nations Charter. The whole concept of self-determination. But now you see the Europeans and the United States spinning it. Well, and again, I think it was Blinken. He's wonderful for quotes. Who's I know that we believe in self-determination, but not when self-determination threatens the rules-based international order. Sorry, at the time of perestroika, for any potential future off-ramp involving the United States and Russia. I mean that in sincerity. You focus on not the Bush period, but you focus on Reagan. How do you go from evil empire to signing a treaty, to standing before Soviet students in Moscow in June of 1988 and saying, I don't view you as evil empire, I view you as friends? How do you do that? That's the magic we have to recapture. To take an arch conservative like Ronald Reagan and what happened? It's not as though the establishment shaped him, because the establishment was Richard Pearl. The establishment were the these people that didn't want to do any of this. Reagan broke ranks and had the cojones to actually go forward and do something that his establishment didn't want him to do. And he went out and he did it. It was a great success, but it was based upon mutual trust and a treaty that was reciprocal in every sense of the word. The United States doesn't do reciprocity anymore. We only engage in arms control when it solely benefits us. And the key to any future U.S.-Russian relationship has to be not only the resurrection of trust, that's going to be very difficult to do, but it's going to have to be genuine reciprocity, that a treaty benefits both parties equally. No party walks away with an advantage. It has to be about both sides getting what they want up front from it, and then you have to have the kind of compliance verification, on-site inspection. It didn't exist prior to the INF Treaty. No party wanted inspectors on their soil because they didn't trust each other. It just they were going to be spies. On-site inspection. I helped write the book on that.
Maybe they wouldn't trust him. Like, it hadn't have been you. I mean, look what Albright and others wanted you to do, right?
Well, that was with Iraq. I'm saying during the Reagan and look, we know there are people conspiring. In my book, I talk about Jesse Helms and how Jesse Helms was continuously trying to undermine the treaty, and he had assistance in the Pentagon because there was a whole cohort of people that were not convinced this was the right thing to do. But they sent the right people in. People like George Connell, people like Doug England. Those are my colonels that rotated as the commanders of Vodkinsk. We had people like Roland LaJoy, the commander of the director of the on-site inspection agency. People like Larry Kelly. And if you read my book, you'll see Larry Kelly and I had a head-on-head contest. He fired me because I didn't speak Russian good enough to go into. And he was a accomplished Russian linguist. But Larry Kelly was the guy. He was Roland LaJoy's deputy at the military liaison mission in Potsdam, Germany, when Arthur Nicholson got shot and killed in East Germany by a Soviet sentry when he was trying to take photographs of a Russian tank shed. Larry Kelly stayed with his body overnight while the Russians were trying to do an autopsy, prevented the autopsy, and then he escorted the body back to Berlin. When they got to the Bridge of Spies, the famous bridge in Berlin where the exchanges, he stopped the ambulance, took out an American flag, put it over the the casket and took the body in the way with the respect it deserved. These are the kind of men and women. There were Robin Ennis. She's probably gonna get mad at me for using her name, but I mentioned her in the book, so I can't. Robin Ennis was an Air Force officer. She was enlisted at the time. She served on a ship that that tracked Soviet missile launches. So the SS-20 would come out and they'd film the warhead coming in and all this stuff. She was one of the few women on the ship, on an all-male ship, and she did just remarkable things. And then she ended up, being an inspector in the Soviet Union, working at Vodkensk. These are the people that made this happen. People who believed, and these were cold warriors. These weren't people who were like soft on Russia. If you're going to call Larry Kelly soft on Russia, you don't know Larry Kelly. Larry Kelly stared the bastards in the eyes while protecting the dead body of his colleague. So he doesn't love the Russians, but he was professional enough that when given the opportunity to implement this treaty, he did so assiduously and with absolute respect for the rule of law. We've lost that. We don't have these people anymore. We don't have, something happened when the Soviet Union went down. We suddenly we stopped treating Russia with respect, and we started treating Russia like a defeated nation. And this is why today you have so many people that are willing to take the side of a neo-Nazi regime in Ukraine rather than understand that Russia's on the right side of history. But they've been programmed to hate Vladimir Putin so much that they're unable and unwilling to consider any scenario where Russia might actually be right. We need to retrain a generation of American patriots. And I say that because I don't want people to say, well, they're soft on Russia, they're a bunch of Russophiles. No, American patriots who believe in American security first and foremost, but understand that American security can't be unilateral in nature. That in order to have genuine American security, you have to sit down with people and treat them as equals, and you have to believe in it. You have to become true believers in the concept of reciprocity, the concept of mutually beneficial treaties, strict compliance verification. We had that, but we lost it.
Well, they don't talk it it's like the macrocosm of what we were talking about earlier about how there has to be dialogue.
No dialogue.
It's worse. Like this silencing, like, oh, we're just not going to talk to North Korea. Oh, like, well, then nothing's going to change. Okay.
Well,
like,
no, something changed. Something changed.
Well, it got worse. But
it got worse. That's
sure.
the point. Donald Trump, whatever you think about Donald Trump, understand this. He met with Kim Jong-un 3 times.
Yeah, Bolton.
No other president, no other sitting president can say that. And he opened the door for denuclearization. Now, he had Mike Pompeo, he had John Bolton, who stabbed him in the back. These are 2 traitors. Literally, these are people who betrayed their nation because of their ideology. Their commander-in-chief said he wanted a genuine denuclearization process, and they shut him down. Just like Jesse Helms and other people tried to shut down the INF treaty, they shut down Donald Trump. And what happened? Biden came in, could have picked up the ball and run with it, chose not to. And now North Korea said, we'll never talk denuclearization again. What you're dealing with now is a North Korean nuclear posture that allows for preemptive use of nuclear weapons whenever they feel threatened by South Korea, Japan, the United States. And what you say, well, why should they ever feel threatened? I don't know. Twice a year, the United States and South Korea rehearse a decapitation attack on North Korea. So the North Koreans are like, if you want to play that game, we nuke everybody. That's our nuclear deterrence.
There is no military solution in North Korea, even without the nukes. The conventional weapons would kill millions. Seoul would get burned to the ground. Just forget about playing chicken like that. You have to have. They were close in the 90s. The 6-member talks, the cooperative economic zones, and I feel like I'm not going to get into Korea right now, but like, that's sort of my backyard. I did want to talk to you about Taiwan and Asian politics, but I think we'll just do that on another show. And I want to talk to you about your book on another show. So
sure.
We'll keep having more Scott Ritter. Just bring it back to Ukraine. We talked about, okay, well, the Italians, they've gone anti-woke and they have a right-wing government. I don't think it's like Mussolini, but I do think there is a fear, or at least that the pendulum could go too far the other direction. Like, okay, what you're reacting to is toxic, but what you end up with might just be a different type of toxin if this goes to a lot of European places.
Look, Europe right now is in free fall, and You can't. Anybody who can sit here and say I have a crystal ball and I'll tell you exactly what Europe's going to look like on the other side, I'd say you're smoking something. We don't know what's going to happen to Europe because there's too many variables, and you can't speak of a European singularity now. I mean, the European Union is not a unified structure right now. It's at war with itself. The same thing with NATO. Just think about it for a second. NATO unity. Joe Biden. It is a sacred trust, the bond of Article 5. Okay, Joe, I get it. But that's a bad Joe Biden impression, but you know what I mean. Germany and Poland. The Poles are saying you owe us $1 trillion of reparations. The Germans say, if you want to scratch off that scab, then you owe us Silesia, and we're taking it back. So you have Germany and Poland right now literally engaged in the rhetoric of war. Let's take it a step further. Turkey and Greece are getting ready to go to war over some islands off the Turkish coast. But France has said that if Turkey goes to war against Greece, France will join Greece against Turkey. I just named 5 NATO nations, all of whom are very major players in NATO. They're talking about going to war with one another. There's a greater likelihood that NATO will go to war with itself than NATO will actually fight Russia head on in over Ukraine. So, there is no NATO unity. There is no European unity. And you know what a pachinko machine is, right? The pachinko ball? Yeah. Okay. If you tell me that by putting the ball down, you can guarantee the track that ball is going to take on its way down, I'd say you're wrong. That ball is going to do whatever the hell that ball wants to do. And that's Europe right now. It's a pachinko ball. And this winter is like a giant pachinko machine. That thing's just banging around. We don't know where it's going to come out because there's too many variables. But
just know it's going down.
It's going to. But that you're right. The one thing we do know is that Europe won't be better at the end of this winter. It's going to be far worse. But I guess the question is, what strain of toxin are we going to be dealing with? It's going to be toxic no matter what. But what strain of toxin are we going to be dealing with? And we can't predict that. I personally believe that Germany may be subjected to a genuine revolution.
They need something. I mean, they've got Nazi symbols in Germany again. I guess it's okay as long as they're blue and yellow instead of red and black and white.
Right, but as you said, once you go that route, I mean, how do we know that when Germany has this revolution that the end result isn't going to be the sickle and hammer, but the end result might be the swastika?
Well, either way, it's going to be horrible. I mean, reacting to one, but it's when people are cold and hungry that they gravitate the guy with the loud voice on top of the hill. Because and I feel like about the United States, this woke and cancel culture is so toxic that people are like, I don't care. Anybody, I'll side with anybody to get rid of that.
And that, and the sad thing is that's what our elections have come down to. Instead of debating, the genuine issue, and I'm not saying that I'm not saying that the woke thing isn't a genuine issue, but wouldn't it be nice if we were talking about unemployment, if we were talking about the housing bubble, if we were talking about these issues? Instead, we're talking about transgendered rights. We're talking about woke. I got to be careful what I say because I will insult everybody. But again, I believe that everybody has a right to be protected, and I don't really care what goes on in your bedroom.
Sure.
But the minority does not get to dictate to the majority, and we can't have a society that stands for that claims to stand for everything but ends up standing for nothing, and that's the direction we're heading. We don't stand for anything anymore. We're
so far in our that we have a supply chain problem, an inflation problem, an open border problem. We've got a housing crisis problem. We've got currency issues. We've got ongoing war, sanctions on people. We're making enemies everywhere. And we're like, could we not talk about butt sex to 9-year-olds in the classroom? Could we teach them math and stuff? Like, if you want, like, that stuff, adults do whatever in your bedroom, but dude, you don't need to talk about this stuff to 4th graders. They need to learn long division or whatever you do in 4th grade. Yeah. You don't need this stuff. And we're like, why do we even have to argue about this? It's just shut up, get out. Like, That way, I'm telling you, there will be a red wave for midterms, and a lot of
Yeah.
people aren't even that excited to have Republicans. They're just excited to get rid of woke Democrats because they went
Look,
way out there.
when you turn 18, it's your life, baby.
Yeah.
Do what you want with your life. But the notion that we're encouraging 11-year-olds to consider sex changes, just it's crazy.
Child abuse.
Yeah.
They're not adults. They don't have agency. It's an irreversible procedure. You shouldn't be messing with it. Like, I'm not even gonna enable or pretend like I'm not against that. I'm 100% against that. You take
100%.
that and get out with it. Like, we're not doing it. I have 3 young boys. Like, of course, I got them out of there. I don't want them going to schools where there's periodic shootings and drugs and everything else. But our culture is a wasteland, and I blame a lot of that on the press. I think culture is downstream from media, and politics is downstream from culture. If we fix the media, it would clean up everything else. Like, all the things you were saying about, like, okay, what happened to these treaties? If the news had reported that, there might have been consequences for it, but they didn't. You have to write books about it because it's not common knowledge. Nobody knows why it got all screwed up. How did it go south so fast? What did George Bush Sr. do? What did Pearl do? What did this person do? They don't know because it's not on TV. If it was, there'd be consequences. What do we get on TV instead? Jerry Springer level garbage.
Yeah, I try and stick to my my comfort zone. To be honest, I'm not as courageous as you are to take on some of these issues because the pushback would be real. I mean, I did a show with a wonderful lady named Cynthia Pooler, local activist here. I get a lot of heat from people. Why are you doing Cynthia's show? Because A, she asked me, and B, she asked decent questions, and C, we always produce. At the end of the day, I think that there's value added for the the product. But we did a discussion about the culture of violence in America. And man, people jumped all over me. They're saying, you shouldn't be talking about it. You should only talk about Ukraine. You should only, as if an American citizen is not allowed to be concerned about the culture of violence. And every American citizen should be concerned about every issue. Right. If you don't have the fact based, then don't be afraid to ask the question or do the research. But at the end of the day, one of the best ways to learn is to engage in a dialogue and discussion, even if that means that I'm coming in with mistaken facts, because the first thing that's going to happen is I'm going to say, Ryan, the vaccine is good for you. And you're going to say, no, Scott, it's not. And then we're going to have a discussion and you're going to educate me and I'm going to go, well, maybe it's not. But you don't get that based upon assumptions. You get that by actually engaging in a meaningful fact-based discussion where both sides can be heard and neither side's suppressed. And at the end of the day, it's up to me to go back and reflect on what I've learned and decide what I want to believe. It's not up to you to convince me. It's up to me to convince myself.
The trouble is, like, it's a great example you gave with vaccines or mRNA therapy, because it's not even a vaccine, but they're dismissive. The pro-vaxxers are just like, you're idiots and anti-science. And the anti-vaxxers, they go, no, you're idiot and anti-science. And
where's the value in that?
Well, we're South Park, and you go, okay, well, somebody might be wrong about science or whatever, but that's not how. You don't start with, hey, moron, blah, blah, but the internet has made it's so hostile. You can't have, that's a conversation ender. If I'm just like, vaccine, like, okay, that's not a discussion. Right. Yeah. If you act or the other way, whatever, like, if you approach it like that, you're not going to get a good conversion rate or whatever, or someone to listen to you, because you're already attacking their character and you're assuming they're dumb, and it's like, a big problem is it got to that point because in the beginning, when it was more even and people could have voiced their opinions about the Rona vaccine or therapy, whatever, no, only one narrative was allowed to talk.
Right. And the other narrative was immediately, the second you raise your hand and ask a question, they delegitimize intellectual curiosity.
The same thing with global warming. Doesn't mean the globe isn't warming, But when you allow the alarmists to say the earth was gone in 12 years and just nonsense, right? It actually hurts that position. And you get alarmists with particular things in science, history, whatever. And if you don't allow the opposite side to speak, they're just discrediting themselves. And it's like, well, how much faith can I have in a conclusion that you're not allowed to question? Even if it is right, I can't have any faith in it because you don't allow any opposition, and I know you don't allow any opposition. So you're hurting your own credibility by saying this is the way, it's illegal to question, or if you do, we're gonna you're fired from your job.
That's the thing. When you if your argument is so fragile that it can't brook anybody asking a question, and if your ability to defend your position is so shallow that you're unable to respond to a question and respond in a civil manner and respond calmly with the facts, etc., that means that you're literally making it up as you go along too, and because that's generally that's the tactic of the intellectually infirm, to start a discussion and then immediately shut down all opposition. And nobody can question your thesis. Your thesis must be accepted at face value no matter what. Most theses, the way they become strong is to be challenged.
Mm-hmm.
You say, I put forward the following proposition, the following hypothesis. You test the hypothesis, you get pushback, you come back, absorb the data, come up with a new hypothesis, put it out there. That's what civil discussion and debate and dialogue is supposed to do. We respect each other. I put something out, you chew on it, you come back with this, I chew on it, we come back, and eventually the facts will come in. And then, we're allowed to, it's possible that we can both look at the same set of facts and come up with different political conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because you have a belief system, I have a belief system. So it's possible for me to respect you as an intellectually sound person, but just say, I disagree. For instance, abortion. At the end of the day, abortion comes down to your belief system about when life begins, the value of life, and the things of that nature. But we're not allowed to have that discussion. It's either black or
white. That argument, like, well, the people that are okay with it, and it's not like an easy decision for them, but they think an embryo, a fetus, and a baby are different things, that these are
different things, yeah.
Potential life, but not quite a life. Others say, nope, soon as the sperm touches the egg, yeah, it's not a big baby, it's just a tiny baby. An embryo is supposed to be a baby. It has a teleology, whatever. Or they may have a religious argument, or they could have a secular argument, whatever. So they think that. And so depending on what your axiom is everything that comes after that is based on that. So you have to get down and figure out, well, is it or isn't it? When is it, or whatever. But when you have people saying stuff like abortion's okay 9 months in, all right, no one ever on either side of that issue ever thought you can get a birthday abortion, right? But that is something they tried to pass in Virginia and in New York, right? And most people like that are pro-life are like, well, okay, the birth control pill like stops it before it even gets the process going. Most of them were okay with that. But the extreme ends, when you push too hard and say, yeah, if it's up to the psychological help of the mother, she can terminate a pregnancy 9 months in. Well, the reaction to that is Supreme Court comes and says, you know what, we're going to kick it back to the states and let them decide. And some of the states said, nope, you can't do this anymore. But it got to that point because you already had your way. You had 9 out of 10 and you had to keep pushing, right? And like, for me, 9 months, 8 months in, that's a baby. I don't know exactly where the line is, but it's not there. And you can't do that. But I admit, I don't know. I'm like, I don't know. I'm not sure 10 weeks or whatever. When it has a brain, I have my own belief, whatever. When people have a discussion about it, but like, it's definitely not 8 months. I thought everyone agreed on that. Apparently not, because there's
apparently not. No. No, but again, that
pop it up, throw it in the dumpster, whatever. Sorry.
No. Look, it's just. But the problem is, here's the deal. I can guarantee you 100% that I'm going to get eviscerated for the conversation we just had, because people aren't mature enough to even have this discussion. That the moment you start to throw something out there, wherever you stand on that line, and discuss it and ask questions about it or whatever, you become evil in their eyes.
Yeah.
And that's the extreme.
Haven't brought up cryptocurrency or vegans, so we haven't
Not yet. We haven't insulted everybody yet, but we can work on it. But the point is, why can't you have a discussion? And the other thing is, why are people afraid of being wrong?
I don't know.
Because to me, knowledge isn't absolute. You aren't born with absolute knowledge. It's a journey of discovery, and a lot of thing about discovery is sometimes go down the wrong path, and the mature person goes, whoa, I'm down the wrong path, let me back up, reorient, let me go until you find the right path, or what is the right path for you. But why are people afraid of being wrong? Why is it a crime to be wrong? Pardon?
We should ask John Bolton. He's not afraid of being wrong. He's a professional at being wrong. We should ask him.
He's a professional, but he doesn't think he's wrong. That's the problem is when you get into this zero defect mentality, people end up doubling down on failure because they can't admit they failed. And so they just have to keep doubling down. And if they have enough institutional weight behind them, failure becomes success.
Yeah, they get married to ideas, and it's an ego issue. It's a maturity issue, but it's something we didn't seem to have that illness as much as we do. And I believe the internet has made it worse because of echo chambers. People create their own cathedral and get their ideas reinforced. And then it's all like owned. You got schooled, whatever the word is. And it's like a
pond. Wasn't that the word pond?
Pond. Yeah, exactly. You're a pawn, not a queen or whatever. And, the Dunning-Kruger effect is in full swing most of the time when you see these things. And we have a special Telegram. I don't know if I should even say the word. Well, I will. It's called Spurgatory, where I just let all the worst ideas go at it right in there. Keep it segregated from my other chat. But, it's been good for them because we got the Wahhabi fanatics and the Zionists and the blacktivists and the white supremacists and just the worst everything, and they scream at each other for a while, and eventually this is a neat thing, they start to compromise and learn. I'm like, wow, I'm glad I'm not in there, because it is that whole arena it's worse than 4chan. But I do look at it. I'll admit it. I'll go in and out of curiosity, just like watching Rex at a NASCAR event. I'm like, wow. But I have seen people bury their differences and things. So dialogue matters. So there needs to be a place for it. I wish I didn't have to create a special Telegram for that to happen. But, this would all be smoothed out if we had free speech on Twitter and normal platforms.
Oh, man. The thing that kills me, Twitter, my daughter got me involved with Twitter to try and promote a book I wrote back in 2017. She said, no, you gotta get on social media and push the book. So I did Twitter, and it took me a while to get used to it. But I have to say, I'm pretty proud of the fact that I got pretty good at Twitter. Mm-hmm. I became a very good practitioner of 244 characters. And the other thing is, I engaged in a lot of really good conversations on Twitter, a lot of good going, I miss Twitter. Because it was I was just starting to get into my own. I mean, I was literally 98,000 followers. Now we know many of them were bots. Thank you, Elon Musk. But 98,000 followers, and I don't view them as followers. I don't like that term. I call 98,000, discussants, people who, listen. But
viewers or something.
Viewers, but all I know is if I had a Twitter page today, or I don't know if it's a page, account, my book, that literally cost me 10,000 sales by not having access to Twitter. It hit you economically. It hits you in terms of the battleground of ideas.
Oh, I know. I've lost over $1 million.
Pardon?
I've lost over $1 million because I had 81K I lost my YouTube, my PayPal, my Patreon, my Twitter, my Instagram, my Facebook, like 32 different platforms. They just blanket banned me on everything. And I didn't even have a means to accept money from people without a Vimeo or a PayPal or a Patreon. Like they couldn't even give me a donation if they wanted to. We had to build all our own stuff. And now that's why, I want to thank Odyssey, Rumble, VK, Telegram, these alternatives that do believe in free speech. Thing is, free markets aren't instant solutions. It takes time for all those platforms to build up the challenge that Apple's, Amazon's, and I could have sold a lot of books and monetized ads, and we were doing well. And I had employees, and the whole company got destroyed because they yanked the YouTube. I had 15 years worth of videos gone just like that. It's crushing.
That's criminal.
I'm gonna give that to my son. Like, here you go. Nope, it's gone. And all the record, all the stuff I said that was true. We covered the Syrian conflict, the Iraq conflict, like you were probably in some of the videos, all gone just like that. And for what? They didn't give us strikes or anything. They just decided these people can't speak. I don't like what you say about Palestine or whatever. I don't like what you said about Ukraine. And I saw that happen with COVID too. I saw that happen with the Ukraine conflict. You and Pepe Escobar got banned on the same day. Then they brought you back. Then they ban you again. They've banned anybody that says, like, I don't think Russia's a whole nation of psychopaths. Hate speech. Like, you're out of here. It's like Kolomoisky and his billions, they throw the money into these things. And I think Elon's going to find out there's a lot of 3-letter networks involved with Twitter. We already found
something
out
going on.
I was talking to Zuckerberg at Facebook, right? I was like, they're talking to all of them. They got a list, and they're like, get rid of all of these people. And in your case, you're on an actual hit list, an actual kill this person hit list.
Look, I don't mean to, I don't want to over dramatize this. I really don't. But the fact of the matter is, I do check my car every morning before I do a walk around, do a 360 walk around, to make sure that I'm not going to go boom, boom, as they've threatened. And worse, you want to kill me, kill me. Okay. I mean, so what? But my wife, my daughter, Maverick, you're going to kill my dog. I'm really going to get mad at you. But the point is, they're threatening innocent people, innocent lives. I'm not saying I'm guilty of anything, but I mean, if you have a problem with me, at least be man enough to meet me in a field, and we'll mark off 30 paces, turn around, fire at each other. But don't come at me using a methodology that threatens my family. And it's not just a physical threat, the mental thing. We live in we live in America.
You caught
it. And I hope you have the beeping thing. But we live in America where you shouldn't have to wake up every morning wondering whether or not somebody put a bomb in your car, because of fact-based speech. Since when did that become a death sentence in America? And I think we now know it's whenever you go against the government. And there's different ways to kill people.
The irony is, what they do is they justify violence by labeling whatever a Nazi. And it's like, well, if so-and-so is a Nazi, then I can punch them, break their stuff, vandalize them, because, and the weird thing is everyone's a Nazi except for actual Nazis.
Except for actual Nazis, yeah.
Well, I'm a terrorist. Actual Nazis. But if somebody has the wrong opinion on the Middle East or Europe or whatever, then, you're a Holocaust denying Nazi that kicks puppies and peed on baby Jesus and whatever. They will defame you. I know you've been defamed. I've been defamed. I read stuff about myself. I'm like, I don't even live in the US. What are you talking about? I didn't do that. I wasn't there. But the lies get disseminated, and there's people talking trash about me on Twitter and YouTube and all these places where I'm not allowed to respond because I'm not allowed.
You can't even respond. Yeah. I mean, Twitter is a free fire zone, except I don't get to assault through the ambush anymore. I just, you take the hits long distance because, and it's funny because people come up, did you see what they said about you on Twitter? No, I'm banned from Twitter. So I don't get to see that anymore. But anyways, it is was, hey, Ryan, unfortunately, I gotta get going pretty soon.
I'll let you go too. Definitely want to have you back on and talk about your latest book. And if you do end up writing a book about NATO, certainly want to get into that next time, another time, maybe Taiwan, Hopefully it'll still be Taiwan before
Still be
that,
Taiwan. Yeah.
that interview. Really appreciate your time, sir. I love talking to you. I like these conversations so much. I get sucked in, but I'm so surprised. No cats, no dogs this time. We were playing the Scott Ritter
My,
drinking game, and there were no animals that popped up this time.
my wife has intervened appropriately, and they are we actually hear people when they say, "Please remove the barking dog." So he's upstairs being coddled and loved into submission.
Well, he won. It was his 40
Yeah,
chess play.
he got everything he wanted from this.
All right. Well, I will see you next
Right.
time, sir. Thank you so
Have a
much.
good night.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.